Coming up next on Scrapbook, let's play. We're going to twist and draw, race, and hula hoop our way through an exhibit all about the toys from our childhood. We'll meet two people who've spent over 35 years in the toy industry, packaging and marketing some of your favorite games, dolls, and construction sets. And can Orlando break the world record for the most people yo-yoing in the same place at the same time? Doc Lucky sure hopes so. It's all about kid stuff, and it's only right here on this very special episode of Scrapbook. Hello, I'm Carol Barnes, and welcome to Scrapbook. Since ancient times, some say as far back as 4000 BC, we've looked for ways to create play. Whether it was creating games out of sticks and stones or dressing your first Barbie doll, toys engage our imaginations and encourage interaction. It's no wonder then that a traveling exhibit about toys has been enjoyed by over 1 million people nationwide. So for the next half hour, get ready to channel your inner child with Kid Stuff, great toys from our childhood. Our flashback to fun begins right here at the Orange County Regional History Center. Erector sets and magic 8 balls may seem like simple playthings, but toys reflect our culture, traditions, and they play a significant role in childhood development. Curator Michael Perkins reveals why the invention and the evolution of toys is such an important part of American history.
The exhibit Kid Stuff, Great Toys from Our Childhood, was designed by the Berkshire Museum in Massachusetts. The curators at the Berkshire decided to look at our society through the lens of toys and how important they are to the development of children. They took some of the most popular toys from the 1950s through 70s, looked at who invented them and how children interact with them. What the children of each generation play with tells us something about that generation and the expectations of its children. Toys in some way define who we are and what we think is important. They also teach us not just to play, but how to share, imagine, and discover.
Too many people don't understand that play is important, critical for their children. Children need to be active, of course. It contributes to their health and their development. And there's more to being active than just the physical development, particularly in spontaneous or free play of children. Because as they play, they learn. Their brains are actually developing. They're developing the language. They're learning to get along with one another, the social skills. They're learning to negotiate with one another. They're learning to plan. They're learning those pre-concepts, those early concepts that are used later on in school, in their academic learning. Those who feel that play is just frivolous and unimportant are making a big mistake, because their later learning is based on their early learning. To thwart that in any way is doing a disservice to children.
Through much of the 20th century, girls played with dolls or jacks. One of the first toys designed specifically for girls was the Easy Bake Oven in the 1960s. Obviously, girls could play with other toys and games, but society's expectation was clear. Play with dolls and learn to cook, and you'll grow up to be a good wife and mother for your own children someday. On the other hand, the toys created for boys included erector sets, Matchbox cars, and Lionel trains. Society's expectations for boys were also clear. You are going to be tomorrow's engineers and builders, and you need to use your imaginations to learn to create the things we'll need in the future. toys, no matter who they were designed for, also taught important lessons about teamwork and sharing. And perhaps more importantly, the games and toys of this era required the use of a child's imagination to really work.
The high-tech toys that are coming on in greater and greater frequency are contributing to problems. That is, children are getting too much sedentary activity, indoor activity. They want to be close to where the plug-ins are, because that's one of their major sources for play. But that kind of play, internet play, high-tech play, is not the same with respect to what children learn as the kind of play where they develop and build and create their own toys.
In many ways, it's the requirement of imagination that makes these toys so special. In today's world of electronic gaming, the game designer has in many cases used up the imagination needed to play the game, creating an entire fantasy world that the gamer may merely walk their way into and play, no imagination required. We can only hope that these toys presented in this exhibit continue to remain popular and stand the test of time, so that children in the future will continue to use their imaginations and grow up to be railroad engineers and race car drivers.
Each of these playthings has a story, little-known trivia and curious tales about how they were created. For instance, did you know that during World War II, Monopoly games were used to smuggle real money into POW camps? Coming up next, it's Toys Exposed.
Ah, the Slinky. Wonderful toy, useful tool, and a weapon? Well, actually, the Slinky was designed first on a battleship in World War II. By accident, of course, the designer was creating springs to help gauge the horsepower of battleship engines when he accidentally dropped one on the floor and watched it roll around and realized that he had just created a toy that would be fun for a girl and a boy.
They're fun for girls and boys.
Developed in 1950, Mr. Potato Head is one of the most significant toys in this entire exhibition. He was first created, however, without the potato. You were expected to provide that yourself, a real one. He also had sharp points on the back side of the nose, eyes, and ears that children would then use to stab into the real potato you provided. The National Safety Council in 1964 decided that wasn't a very good idea and made the folks who created Mr. Potato Head change the way they do it. And it became what we know of today with the plastic potato and the plastic pieces. Did you know Barbie's full name is Barbara Millicent Roberts, and her measurements, if she were life-size, would be 5 feet 9 inches tall and an incredible 39, 18, 33. Who doesn't remember growing up and playing with their automatic binding bricks? Of course, we know these better as Legos, but that was the original name when they were invented in 1949 in Denmark. The Danish creator soon realized he needed a little better name, so he got into his own language. and came up with Legos, which is Danish leg godt, which means to play well. In 1943, a pigeon named G.I. Joe saved the lives of over 1,000 Italian villagers by flying a message into the village that it was scheduled to be bombarded by the Allies. 2 years later, a hit movie entitled The Story of G.I. Joe was released about the life of war correspondent Ernie Pyle. Finally, in 1964, Hasbro introduced the G.I. Joe doll, a military-themed action figure. So the mystery is, was he named after the pigeon or the movie?
Did you know that 75% of all toys sold in the U.S. are produced in China? That's a far cry from the early days of toy manufacturing, when at least 90% of toys were made in North America. Coming up next, Daniel and Tony Assail remember those good old days and have some pretty interesting stories to share about the toy business. When the Orlando Regional History Center decided to bring the Kid Stuff exhibit to Central Florida, they wanted to form an advisory board to help organize the exhibit. They didn't have to look any further than Daniel and Tony Assail, two Winter Park residents who've spent over 35 years tinkering with toys.
I'm Tony Assail, and I've been involved in the toy industry since the early 70s. I met Daniel in the toy industry at a toy company.
My name is Daniel Assail. I've been involved in the toy industry as well since 1973. We actually met at Gabriel Industries in 1977.
And we were having this whirlwind office romance. He'd take me out to dinner, and then he'd disappear for hours on end, sitting and putting erector sets together and writing instructions. It went on for, I don't know, weeks. He had no time whatsoever. But in between time, he took me out to lunch and out to dinner. And then he married me a few weeks later. So I guess it worked out okay.
I've done packaging and product design work for Tinker Toy, for erector sets, and also for Magic 8 Ball. This is my daughter when she was just a little girl. This was Trouble. It had already this time, this was in the late 70s, already was a very, very successful game. This was the first time there was a demonstrator of the Pop-O-Matic feature, which is still part of the game today. Essentially a version of this logo, which I designed in 1978, is still used. At the time, there was interest in trying to widen this brand, so as well as the famous Magic 8 Ball, there were all these other versions. There was the Magic Jackpot, and the Zodiac Ball, and the Word Shaker, and this at the time was considered very innovative packaging. And then on the back you could try it out, and that was the first time packaging had ever been done that way. The interesting thing about Tinker Toy was at the time that I was doing that packaging, there was a serious question as to whether or not Tinker Toy would continue to be marketed in round cans, round cardboard cans, which traditionally it had been. And the argument was that they had poor shelf presence, that you could not see the logo from every angle. And I came up with a solution which actually just repeated the logo all the way around the cans. It was very successful. At the time, it almost doubled the sales of Tinkertoy in that year that it was introduced. The way this was invented was the inventor had seen children playing with pencils and with spools and thought, oh, that would make a great way to be able to build things. Gabriel had offices near Toy Center in New York where there were offices and showrooms for dozens and dozens and dozens of toy companies. It was the center of the toy industry in the world at the time. There was about a 10-block area around 200 Fifth Avenue, which was the toy building. Huge community of people who were involved in the toy industry. You couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't get a cup of coffee. You couldn't go do research at FAO Schwarz. You couldn't do anything without running into other people who were also involved in the toy industry. It was like being part of a community of like Santa's little helpers. And virtually all of that no longer exists as it did at the time.
It isn't. It's great. I mean, it's still good, but it's not the same.
We actually renovated a number of different toy showrooms in 200 Fifth Avenue. This is actually an original doorknob from 200 Fifth Avenue, which was not used in one of the renovations. And this stands for Fifth Avenue Building, F-A-B. This was the Giggle Stick. These were great. Sold about 1.5 million of these in 1 year. It was a simple stick like this, and when you turned it around, it would make all of this noise, and it was great because truckloads of these things would go down the street making whoop, 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 all kinds of different funny sounds.
And at the time, which I don't believe exists anymore, there was a government agency called the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission. And they got so many complaints that they had to put a warning on the master carton, you know, that said "sound okay."
On the side of the trucks, on the side of the master cartons, because it would go down the street with literally thousands of these things inside the truck and go like this. And people thought like, oh my God, what's going on?
One of the first industries that went into China was the toy industry, and we were one of the first. Gabriel at the time was one of the first companies that went to that country. I remember when a lot of our executives went over, they were trepidatious, you know, it was this hidden kind of isolation type country. And slowly but surely over a period of time, the manufacturing started to move into China.
The toy industry, at least toys as they were marketed in the United States, was up until a certain point essentially strictly an American cultural phenomenon in America. And it spoke to what the culture of America was. Whereas now it's much, much more international.
The other big change was during the 80s when companies were gobbling each other up. And Gabriel was part of that. They bought a lot of companies and they got bought by CBS. And the toy companies started to get really big, you know, because of the acquisitions. When a company like Beatrice Foods and Samsonite starts going in, General Mills starts going into the toy industry and buying the little guys up, it loses that entrepreneurial kind of rugged individualist kind of atmosphere.
Large companies, even the largest companies, were essentially run by several individuals. They were pretty much families, privately owned. Decisions were largely based on gut reactions.
No focus groups.
And no focus groups. And that really started to change, and those decisions started to become more and more and more corporate, more and more also scientifically based in some cases.
If you look at a hula hoop, it's prelude to the Wii in a way, I don't know. It gets you up, gets you moving. Kids want to burn off that energy. They really, really do. And if you give them the opportunity, they'll think of something really, really good to do with pickup sticks or a hula hoop. And I think that's why the exhibit at the museum is timely and very, very successful right now, because it's kind of reminding us of a little bit simpler time, and a time where we're off our bottoms and actually really, truly physically interacting with our toys.
Daniel and Tony created their own company, Assail Associates, where they continue to work with theme parks and toy companies, producing products that educate and entertain children in Florida and across the country. For information about their work, visit their website, www.aaidesigns.com. Our trip through the world of toys has a big finale, and it's going to break world records. Can Central Florida yo-yo its way into history? Don't go away. Scrapbook will return with thousands of yo-yo fans and a doctor who already holds the Guinness Book record for the largest collection of these little wind-ups. And guess what? He lives right here in Orlando.
Hey, come on in.
No matter what your skill level is, you've probably played with a yo-yo. And if you're any good, maybe you can show off a trick or two. Well, the technique didn't matter when thousands of people, young and old, gathered in Heritage Square at the Orange County Regional History Center. The goal was to break the 2-minute record for the most people yo-yoing simultaneously in one place. The Guinness World Record is 1,496 people. The American Yo-Yo Association record is 631. Central Florida is poised to break both records. With complimentary Duncan yo-yos in hand, the eager crowd is up for the challenge. The countdown to history is about to begin. Enjoying the festivities is physician, champion swimmer, and filmmaker Dr. Lucky Meisenheimer, better known as Doc Lucky. Oh, and did I mention? He holds the record for the largest collection of yo-yos. Care to see it?
Come on in. I think my love of yo-yos is largely the history. I became passionate about yo-yos when I found out about the history of the competitions and how the demonstrators would go around from city to city, and they would have these citywide contests and then state contests and then national contests. And it was really the rites of passage for young men in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and even early 60s to enter these yo-yo contests. And a lot of this history wasn't being preserved. People didn't write about it. It was just something that everybody did, but nobody ever thought to write about it. So when I found out about it and found that it was being kind of a lost piece of Americana, I started writing about it, wrote a book on the history of yo-yoing collecting, and this is what I think drives my passion.
Dip 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 doody dow ba doop beep doo ba da da.
The way yo-yos would have been sold, say, 50 years ago. If you went into the 5 and 10 store, usually the counter would have a little carton here with a lot of graphics on there, full of yo-yos, and you just pick one up, and usually you would spend 25 or 50 cents. Here's a Hostess cupcake yo-yo that looks like a Hostess cupcake. These toys here are called bandolores. These were yo-yos before we called them yo-yos. And this goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. The bandolore was one of the favorite toys of the elite. A lot of people ask what my favorite type of yo-yo to collect is, and interestingly enough, it's probably not the most expensive or even the most historic, but I love cartoon character yo-yos or character yo-yos. If you ever watched a Saturday morning cartoon, you would probably find your favorite cartoon on the face of a yo-yo somewhere in this collection. In 1960, they came out with these Streaking Sonic satellite yo-yos, and you can hear the screaming Sonic satellite right there. This is a yo-yo that was a prop in the movie Viva Rock Vegas, the Flintstones movie. This is called the vaporizer yo-yo, and the reason it's called the vaporizer yo-yo, if you kind of go like this, it smells like strawberries. And what yo-yo collection would be complete without the disco ball yo-yo? Yo-yos now have a central ball-bearing axle. It's not a wood axle like they used to make, but this has the actual ball-bearing transaxle around the axle, so the string rests on that, and then it can spin for long periods of time. Matter of fact, the world record for the longest spinning yo-yo is up to 13 minutes now. The most expensive retail yo-yo right now is this Duncan MG. It's actually made out of magnesium, and if you buy it in the case with all the counterweights, it will set you back $400. So if you have an extra $400 lying around and you don't know what to do with it, Duncan MG. The most famous yo-yo trick of all times is walk the dog. Every new generation discovers the yo-yo and finds out what a wonderful toy it is. So I think it's great that the History Center took the chance to highlight the yo-yo. Having 17, 18, however many hundred people out there playing the yo-yo all at once made my heart swell. It was just a wonderful sight. Nobody is offended by a yo-yo. You can always be politically correct with a yo-yo. I've gotten yo-yos from all over the world. I love picking up the souvenir yo-yos for patients. It is such a multi-generational toy. You would see grandfathers out there with their grandkids showing them how to do yo-yo tricks. I mean, that's what America is all about. You can never have too many yo-yos.
2,110 people poured into Heritage Square and helped break both world records. We made history celebrating one of America's timeless toys, the yo-yo. I hope you've enjoyed this very playful episode of Scrapbook. The kids' stuff we love from our childhood tells us a lot about who we are and what our imaginations can create. Join us again soon for more stories from our History Center and from the people and places that make up the fabric of Central Florida's past.